All right, welcome back to Cyber for Hire, the Managed Security Podcast. Once again, I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media and the Cyber Risk Alliance. In the first half of our show, we talked with Brian Johnson at Crucible about client non-compliance. But right now, I'd like to welcome back my co-host for the day, Jessica C. Davis, also from Cyber Risk Alliance, MSSP Alert, and Channel E2E, because it's time for us to examine our MSSP industry strategy topic of the week, presenting our big idea in business: beware FUD, avoiding fear tactics when selling your managed services. The consequences of a cyber attack can be devastating, and it does make sense for managed security services providers to impress on their current and prospective clients the risks of not investing in prevention and response. However, many cyber thought leaders believe that certain lines should not be crossed. Advice is one thing, fearmongering is another, and if you pursue the FUD angle too hard, you may simply come off as a predatory opportunist looking to push your services on the customer. So this discussion will reveal how to convey your message and market your services in a way that doesn't exaggerate existing threats and turn off your clients. So Jessica, welcome back, and as always, we are going to jump right into things. I think one of the tricky things about FUD is that while most thought leaders in the cyberspace agree that it's generally bad and ineffective, and even that's not even 100% unanimously agreed on, because I've talked to some people who said FUD in a couple of instances might actually work out for you, but no one can even really agree on where exactly that line is of what's FUD and what's not. You know, what is truly a threat that is worth maybe not quite panicking about, but really impressing on them, this is very serious, you need to do something about it, and to what extent you're maybe trying to oversell them. And I feel like that's the first thing, is really having a good definition in your mind of where you cross the line.
Yeah, I get that. That's an interesting point. And I think certainly, you know, when things are scary, there's a tendency to say, I can't deal with this right now. I'm going to ignore it because I can't deal with it right now. It's too much. And maybe in those cases, you know, you do need to shake your client, not literally, but say, you know, pay attention to this. This is important. This can impact your business. This can shut you down. And, you know, you're not going to have a business if you don't pay attention to this. But if your clients are paying attention, they see the news about ransomware attacks and other security problems, but they're busy running their businesses, and so they're looking for someone to protect them. And so, you know, they need someone like you to do that. It may be tempting when you're trying to sell them on security services to focus on all the negative things that can happen, and all that's true, of course. And they could be hit with a ransomware attack. Their employees could be phished. Their businesses could shut down if there's a serious incident. And they need to be paying attention to that. But does any of that lead to a better sales outcome for your organization? And that's the big question there too, on the business side.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, I mean, when you talk to clients about security, you want them to be aware of the risks, right?
Yeah.
But the conversation should leave them with a sense of readiness and not fear. Readiness that your services are going to help with mitigate their security posture.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you mentioned phishing just now, and it's funny. I almost feel like there are certain parallels between a FUD sale and a phish in terms of just some of that ultra urgent language of trying to make somebody make a hasty snap decision that maybe isn't really in their best interest. Is there certain red flag language or approaches to a sales pitch for your services that, you know, should immediately, you know, raise eyebrows in terms of maybe this is going a little bit too far and getting into that FUD category?
I love that analogy, Bradley, of the phishing attack to the FUD. That's awesome. Because I don't know about you, Well, I do know, your dental story from earlier in the show. When people are pushy with you like that, I personally, and maybe it's the journalists in us, right? I personally tend to take a step back and get more skeptical about what they're trying to sell me. And I'm talking about me as a buyer, not me as someone who's trying to sell something. But I know that people who do sales on the managed services side, they're buyers of things as well in their lives. So, what are the red flags that go off for them when people are trying to sell them things? It sort of makes you more sophisticated as a consumer when you're doing that kind of selling. So I would say, yeah, I mean, I am a little put off by those hard sales tactics. I like a lot of information. Not everyone's like me, I realize, but for me, the more transparent someone is with me, the more likely I am to trust them. And that trust is what builds a relationship. And relationships are essential with your customers. The channel is about relationships, not transactions.
Yeah, let's talk about the whys a little bit behind why it's important to try to avoid fear, uncertainty, and doubt in your pitch. If you're basically trying to convince a client, for example, like just throwing it out there as just like one, for instance, like, hey, you definitely need our managed XDR service because, blah, blah, blah. Here are the reasons. And if it doesn't happen, then, your whole world's going to crumble because you're basically at risk for, A, B, and C. And then they take your advice. In the short term, it might seem like a big gain and win for you because, hey, more revenue coming your way. But ultimately, if the client can't ultimately justify that adoption of the service and suddenly realize there really wasn't a good business case for it, more medium to long term, there can be some repercussions.
So that's interesting. So I would say that managed security service providers would do well to constantly be looking at their stacks in terms of protecting their customers and advising their customers on the importance of each aspect of the stacks. And creating that kind of gap report on a regular basis. Here's what you have protected. Here are the things that are still at risk. Here are the things that need to be patched. Here are the things you need to be looking at. And continue. I mean, maybe on a quarterly basis, talk to the client about the things that need to be remediated. And standardizing your customers on your security stack is an important part of providing those security services. You do your best job for your customers when they're all receiving the same types of services. So you can spot more anomalies that you can do a better job of spotting anomalies that way. I mean, it just works better. So, I think it's an ongoing conversation with customers that you need to have, and you shouldn't wait a year or something to have a discussion with a customer about why their XDR service continues to be important. You should be having that discussion on a quarterly basis and doing those gap reports.
Yeah, absolutely. In a recent episode, we had a Dear Cyber for Hire bit that touched on this a little bit. The notion of a vendor where they release some kind of a survey that they commissioned, which says something to the degree of like 99% of security and IT professionals that don't have a XYZ solution, which, by the way, we happen to specialize in, and that seems to be our wheelhouse, suffered some kind of a catastrophic data loss, which just illustrates how important this particular solution is, according to this purely unbiased, quote unquote, research. And It's not just vendors that do this. A lot of organizations and companies do this. I've gotten pitches from MSSP type companies too that try to demonstrate through survey results and research, why it's better to have somebody manage security for you. But some of these surveys really are conducted in a way that they're asking some loaded questions, or they're slanted. And so I think, again, do you have any advice or thoughts in terms of if you are a managed services provider, in terms of using any kind of surveys, research statistics that you commission to then show to prospective clients in terms of making sure that if you're going to do that, it does come off like this was a pretty scientific, objective exercise, rather than something that was just purely meant to evoke fear and ultimately sales?
Yeah. So, from my perspective, and my advice would be, you are the trusted advisor to your clients. You want to remain the trusted advisor. So you want to be transparent with them, and you want to be honest with them as much as you can about what the actual risk is. You don't have to manufacture a bunch of statistics to show how dangerous things are. There's plenty of stuff out there that's scary that you can protect your clients from. So, 99%, I don't know. That seems unnecessary and over the top, and will put your clients in a skeptical state of mind, if you ask me.
Yeah, for sure. Is there occasionally an exception to the rule where perhaps a little FUD is justified? Maybe you're an MSSP, and there is some kind of active campaign right now that's going on that is particularly of concern, maybe because your clientele specializes in a sector that has become a major target of a group or an exploit campaign that is currently wreaking havoc on the cybersecurity community. And in a case like that, it might be necessary to say, hey, the risk level on this has really actually, legitimately gone up. If we were to quantify the risk here, it's skyrocketing, and now is the time to act. Is there an exception to the rule occasionally with FUD?
FUD is playing on emotions, right? And so, if we're having a conversation about the risk of something that's going on in the market right now, that's a legitimate risk discussion that you should be having with your clients. But should you be employing fear, uncertainty, and doubt to push your clients into something? I don't know. I don't know that you should be playing on your clients' emotions like that. They're business people, and they should understand the risk factors. And if you're not able to have, I've heard this debated at various industry conferences over the years. Maybe it's time for you to move that client along to someone else if they're not going to take their security posture seriously. You may not be able to convert them. And so that comes back to you, and it's going to hurt them in the long run. And again, I would rather have the risk discussion with them than try to play on their emotions in that way.
Yeah, there's certainly, I think, a way to do it in a more reasonable manner in a lot of cases, rather than, again, take that sky is falling approach to things. Because ultimately, in the end, the MSSP client relationship is supposed to be built on a solid core foundation of trust. And if you employ tactics that ultimately could erode trust down the line, then you're really only hurting yourself as time goes on. So I think you make some excellent points here on the notion of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And, interesting topic. There's lots of, points of view on this. As we said, sometimes hard to define when you cross that line into FUD, but it's something you should always be aware of. So interesting discussion there, but we're going to move on to our next order of business now, Jessica. And that is a segment that we like to call Dear Cyber for Hire. Now, this is an advice column segment where we get to play marriage counselor between MSSPs and their clients to help mend fences when the relationship goes awry. Now, the following letter I'm about to read to you, Jessica, has been dramatized and anonymized to protect the innocent. But the conflict represented here is a very real problem that companies face. And so, Jessica, it's time to immerse ourselves in some juicy MSSP melodrama. And this complaint comes from the provider side of the relationship. So, fellas, cue the music. Dear Cyber for Hire, after many years of bliss and harmony between me and my significant other, it finally happened. We have a new addition to our family. But please, don't congratulate us. This new bundle of joy is more of a monster that no one could possibly love. I'm sorry if that makes me sound terrible, but I didn't ask my client to go off on a mergers and acquisition spree, annexing a company I never asked for. My team went from managing a very straightforward, streamlined client to now securing a Frankenstein company, pieces of which I have very little visibility into. The newly acquired business's processes, systems, and employees are disparate and different. Their tech is legacy, and it's not as if I got to perform an assessment in advance to determine if their cyber posture even meets my standards. How did I get roped into this mess? Sincerely, agitated and anxious around abruptly acquired addition in Ann Arbor. Jessica, in a previous episode, just the last one actually, we talked about how MSSPs handle their own in-house M&A activity. Now we're looking at M&A from a different angle here, where suddenly your client brings on a whole new unit. What can an MSSP do in this situation? Should they have been more involved in some of the initial security vetting?
Well, this can happen. And your client doesn't need to ask your permission to acquire another company. But honestly, service providers know what to do here, I think. You've onboarded new clients before, and the process is similar. You've explained to the new clients the importance of doing an asset inventory. Your existing client is going to understand this is part of your process since you've gone through it before with them. Since your client is the acquirer and not the acquisition target, you will have more say in this process. Your existing client will want the systems buttoned up and secured as soon as possible so that the acquisition doesn't compromise their existing security measures. Nobody wants this acquisition to be the cause of an incident. You probably already have the tools in-house to do this asset inventory on the acquisition ASAP. Plenty of tools out there. The new acquisition systems aren't going to be instantly integrated into your client's IT infrastructure the moment that your client signs on the dotted line. So you can do the asset inventory first thing, as if you were onboarding a new client. You have explained to your existing client the importance of standardized systems and a standardized stack in your security posture. They should be ready for you to have this conversation about onboarding these new assets to the standardized stack. You may want to have a conversation about the risks of delaying these actions if your client tries to put this off. This is ultimately their decision, of course, but you will have done your job in advising your clients of the risks and making recommendations to mitigate those risks ASAP.
Makes perfect sense, Jessica. We've certainly, heard stories before about organizations where they make some kind of a major merger or acquisition, and if they have an in-house cyber and IT team, it's always generally recommended. that they be part of an initial assessment or vetting of this other organization to see if they meet certain levels of cyber standards. Because if there is something of grave concern, they can go to management and say, this actually may end up being very costly for us because they're to actually borrow a theme maybe from segment one, they're non-compliant, for example, in a lot of ways, and could open us up to certain, legal liabilities. We're seeing a lot of security and privacy issues here. So in a situation where you don't have maybe that expertise in-house to do that vetting prior to signing the dotted line, is it at all advisable for a client to go to a trusted vCISO or managed security service provider and say, can you help us do this initial assessment to help us finalize our decision on whether we're consummating this relationship? Or does that maybe just make things too complicated, bringing in another, outsourced outside organization that you're working with to get their, 2 cents on this business transaction?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Bradley. I think that, you would want to have that kind of relationship with your customer so that your customer trusted you to that degree, that they would maybe invite you into that transaction to take a look and make that part of it. But it comes down to whether the customer would consider that security posture and IT infrastructure to be a deal breaker. And it's possible that they wouldn't. It depends on what the major assets of the company are. Some companies it's the customer list. Some companies it's the contracts. So it really depends on the industry, depends on the businesses. It would be lovely to think that your customer trusted you enough to bring you in, and if that happened to be a deal breaker in a highly regulated industry. But again, it's not something that you have control over before the deal happens. And so, you deal with it when it's dealt to you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's the bottom line when it really comes down to it. Sound advice, Jessica, makes perfect sense. Another relationship saved. Hopefully our listeners have learned from this and don't make the same mistake. And remember, if you've been struggling with your managed security services relationship, whether you're the user or the provider, we want to hear from you. So please write to us at cyberforhire@cyberriskalliance.com, and we might use your letter in a future episode. All right, well, it's almost time to wrap things up, but before we go, it's time for us to get a little random as we share with you, drumroll please, our irrelevant news item of the week. Now, this is a real news pitch that I've received in my inbox for reasons that are entirely inexplicable to me. Are you ready to get random, Jessica?
I guess so. I'm afraid.
Okay. Trust me, it'll be painless. It'll be fun.
Okay.
Hey, Bradley, have you ever found yourself stranded and in need of a taxi only to be unsure of the cost? Well, a recent study conducted by airportparkingreservations.com has unveiled the average cost of a taxi in the United States, with the highest taxi fares for 9-mile journeys. So I don't know why they arbitrarily picked 9 miles, but why that's the magic number. But Jessica, for starters, would you care to guess which state has the most expensive taxis for a 9-mile trip on average?
I would say New York. That would be my guess.
That is an absolutely logical, well-founded guess, and it is totally wrong. But you're not too far off. New York is number 4 on the list, so it was a good guess. But believe it or not, strangely, Maine actually takes the top spot as the most expensive state for 9-mile taxi rides with an average taxi cost of $35.92. Right behind that would be Rhode Island, then New Mexico, then New York, then Hawaii. The U.S. state with the cheapest taxi rates for the 9-mile trip on average is Iowa, with a $20.86 cost. Now, this leads me to my next question to you, Jessica, which is just not necessarily what was the most expensive taxi ride you've ever taken, but what's maybe the worst or weirdest cab ride that you've ever experienced?
Oh, gosh.
And while you're thinking of that, maybe I'll let you ruminate that on a second, because
Yeah.
I can tell you for sure that I've definitely had my share of strange ones. I've ridden in a lot of taxis, and I've had like everything from like conspiracy theorist cab drivers like telling me all their like wild theories about the world, where you basically just sit there and be like, yep, yep, I agree with you, because I'm going to agree with whatever you say at this point, because otherwise, like, you're going to turn around and be like, and you're part of it. And, you know, I mean, like where they just creep me out and I'm just like, I'll just go along with whatever they're saying. I mean, I had one guy one time that said something to me along the lines of like, you know what's always been strange to me? If the sun makes things hot, what's out there that makes things cold? And I even had one guy who, in the middle of a very important airport run that I had to make, asked me if he could stop at the convenience store and buy himself a sandwich halfway through the trip. So those would be some of my weirder taxi trips.
You win, Bradley.
I win?
Definitely. I have not had weird cab encounters, and honestly, I've really enjoyed chatting with my taxi and Uber drivers, but I don't live in New York, so I probably have not taken as many cabs as you. I did, embarrassingly mispronounce the names of different places that I've asked to go to. Like going to La Jolla, California. That was very embarrassing, and I'm still mocked to this day by my husband for that one. So yeah, I've learned my lessons, and but no, knock wood, I don't want to, invite bad luck, but yeah, I've enjoyed the conversations I've had with my taxi drivers. I like talking to those guys.
Fair enough. You've had some enjoyable. I've had enjoyable experiences too. Just had some weird ones. Probably ultimate favorite one that I didn't mention before was just a Vegas cab ride where the driver was basically talking about this super drunk Mr. T impersonator that he had to drive around on occasion, and a whole wild story about that as well. So I've been regaled with some pretty amazing stories myself from a cab driver here and there.
Very entertaining.
But, yeah, absolutely. And hopefully we've entertained everybody today with this latest episode, but unfortunately we are now officially out of time. But fret not, we will be back again next week with episode number 28. So one last thank you to my guest fill-in host, Jessica C. Davis, for joining us today. Meanwhile, feel free to check out even more cybersecurity podcast content on the SC Media, MSSP Alert, and Channel E2E websites. Until next time, I'm Bradley Barth. Please reach out to us via our show page with your comments, questions, and insights about the business of cybersecurity. We will keep the conversation going on the next episode of Cyber for Hire, your inside source for cyber outsourcing.